The committee will come to order, and today we welcome General Christopher Cavoli, the commander of U.S. European Command, and General Michael Langley, the commander of U.S. Africa Command. I thank them both for being with us today. First of all, we meet today in the wake of the difficult news that we have been learning more about over the last few days. We've been saddened by the death of 4 American service members, and we now know the names of them all. They passed away in a tragic training accident in Lithuania, and so we recognize them and send our best to their families and friends. But this morning, we talk about 2 very important areas of responsibility. The European continent is now entering its 3rd year of war as Russia continues its brutal assault against Ukraine. There's no question who started this war. Despite the physical and psychological exhaustion and material constraints from the conflict, the Ukrainian military and people have heroically and successfully continued to resist Russian efforts to subjugate them. The war serves as a brutal reminder that Vladimir Putin has chosen to become an enemy of the West and to throw away Russia's future. The Department of Defense is right to label China as our pacing threat. Nonetheless, Russia and its thousands of varied nuclear weapons continue to pose an existential danger to the United States and to our allies. Moscow's military aggression sows uncertainty and threatens vital U.S. interests every day, as Europe remains by far our largest trading partner and source of investment in the United States. The war in Ukraine has exposed the Russian army's weakness, but it also has shown that Russia can adapt to changing circumstances and can endure heavy cost. The Russian industrial base, aided by China, North Korea, and Iran, has demonstrated its ability to sustain Putin's army. Russia would likely use any pause in fighting to reconstitute its military. I say all this to make a simple point. We cannot wish away the Russian threat. Despite Russia's aggression, there are some who believe now is the time to reduce drastically our military footprint in Europe. This is a viewpoint with which I disagree. I'm troubled that this deeply misguided and dangerous view is held by some mid-level bureaucrats within the Defense Department. They've been working to pursue a U.S. retreat from Europe, and they've often been doing so without coordinating with the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Council. As I have said, Russia is now mobilized for permanent war. Withdrawing now would doom any hope of lasting peace in Europe. Right now, we have a unique opportunity in Europe. President Trump's leadership and the Russian threat have jolted Europe awake. Many nations have begun rebuilding their militaries. Our allies on the eastern flank, Poland, the Baltic states, and Romania are all spending much more than we are. Much more than we are. The United Kingdom and France are awakening. Even Germany shows signs of stirring. NATO should be led by the United States, but Europe should shoulder most of the military burden. We can achieve that by combining the right incentives with low-cost assistance from the United States, including a drastically overhauled foreign military sales system. To build that NATO, we must maintain our current posture, which will serve as a bridge to the planned buildup of combat power by our European NATO allies. After 3 years of war, we probably should make some posture adjustments, including moving forces east. But we must maintain a strong military posture in Europe overall. Failing to do so risks tempting Russian adventurism before our European allies have been able to ramp up their forces fully and their capabilities. The Chinese Communist Party views its competition against the United States as a global project. To China, the continents of Europe, Asia, South America, and Africa are all critical in Xi Jinping's unprecedented global military expansion. In particular, Beijing has been active on the African continent. In Djibouti, China's naval base has grown substantially. It's now capable of hosting China's most advanced naval vessels and serving as an intelligence collection outpost against American and allied forces in the entire region. China is also actively pursuing a naval base in Africa's western coast, the Atlantic coast, which would provide an enduring foothold along the Atlantic Ocean. According to General Langley, this would, quote, change the whole calculus of the geostrategic campaign plans of protecting the American homeland, unquote. Russia also has designs on the African continent. In destabilizing, its destabilizing strategy is to trade security assistance for access to Africa's abundant natural resources. This would help fund Vladimir Putin's malign activities around the world. At the center of Putin's Africa strategy is Libya, which serves as Russia's key logistical node and enables its activities across the continent. I look forward to General Langley's assessment of Africa's importance to Vladimir Putin's strategic objectives, as well as his description of what's being done to counter Russian efforts, particularly in Libya. We cannot ignore the enduring threat posed by ISIS and al-Qaeda in Africa. Without sustained pressure, these vicious terrorists will reconstitute and continue to threaten America. President Trump was absolutely right to approve strikes against ISIS leadership targets in Somalia in recent weeks. Our adversaries view their fight against America as a global fight. We see their efforts playing out across Europe and Africa in particular. Now is not the time for an American withdrawal from these theaters. We cannot allow the Chinese Communist Party and its partners in Moscow, Tehran, and Pyongyang to overcome us strategically or to erode the ability to protect American interests around the world. So we have a lot of important topics to talk about today. I look forward to hearing our witnesses address these and many other concerns during this hearing, along with my friend, the ranking member, whom I recognize right now.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me begin by adding my condolences to the families of those soldiers who perished in Lithuania. General Cavoli, General Langley, welcome. Thank you both for appearing today. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize that this will be the final hearing before the committee for each of you before your well-deserved retirements.
No.
Yes. Well, we could change that. Well, for 4 decades, you have stepped forward time after time to lead American service members, including in combat, and through historically difficult challenges. You have made the United States safer. You have made our forces in Europe and Africa stronger. On behalf of this committee, thank you for your distinguished service to our nation. Congratulations to you and your families on your pending retirements. For more than 3 years, EUCOM has been the backbone of the international effort to support Ukraine in its war of survival against Russia. EUCOM has enabled the Ukrainians to succeed on the battlefield while sending an unmistakable message to America's adversaries around the globe. However, in recent months, the position of the United States has reversed. The Trump administration has repeatedly shown disrespect and contempt for NATO and our European allies. The Trump administration has begun negotiating with Vladimir Putin, but has surrendered much of our strongest leverage for nothing in return. As the administration seeks to negotiate an end to the war, I would point out that Russia is not in a strong position. Putin has sustained staggering costs in Ukraine, including more than 200,000 soldiers killed and hundreds of billions of dollars of military equipment and weapons destroyed. Russia has even turned to North Korea for reinforcements. In addition, Russia's closest ally in the war, Iran, is weaker than it has been in decades due to recent Israeli and U.S. actions. In contrast, the Ukrainian military continues to hold its ground and to display impressive innovation on the battlefield, and the Ukrainian people remain resolute in the face of daily Russian brutality. I would argue that there is never a time to appease Putin, but it is certainly not now. The Russians do not seem interested in actually negotiating or ending this war, and the Ukrainians should not be forced to make a deal that disadvantages them. General Cavoli, you have testified in the past that Russia is, quote, a chronic and growing threat to U.S. interests. I would appreciate your assessment of the war in Ukraine and your views on future U.S. military activities and investments needed in the EUCOM area to uphold our steadfast commitment to collective defense and America's security. In Africa, our adversaries have focused on building trade relationships while seizing influence from us. China's military ambitions on the continent are no secret, from their growing presence in Djibouti to the more than 100 seaports that have been constructed, financed, or operated by Chinese state-owned enterprises and could be used as dual use for future military contingencies. Russia has expanded its military engagement in Africa also, including by restructuring the Wagner Group's operations under an umbrella organization called Africa Corps, an historic irony of great proportions. They want to expand the reach of the Russian private military enterprise across the entire continent. Russia is also investing heavily in disinformation campaigns across the continent to spread anti-Western movements, undermine democracy, and promote Russian-backed authoritarian leaders, especially in regions like West Africa. It would seem that America's competitors recognize that to neglect Africa is to invite long-term strategic peril. General Langley, given these challenges, AFRICOM must continue to explore new methods to maintain U.S. security interest in the region. To do so, it is important that your command receives the resources it needs to maintain engagement and increase situational awareness across the continent. I would appreciate your thoughts on the wide-ranging set of challenges and what your command needs to best address these challenges. As we know, economic and political stability is essential for any partner nation anywhere in the world. For decades, we have relied upon our State Department diplomats and the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, to develop deep, lasting relationships that can outlast China and Russia's economic coercion. Indeed, until recently, AFRICOM had a senior USAID officer within the command who served as the senior development advisor and reported directly to the commander. I'm deeply concerned that our soft power leadership in Europe and Africa has been badly crippled over the past several months. General Cavoli, General Langley, I would like to hear your perspectives on the critical importance of diplomacy and developmental tools to achieve our national security objectives and how our competitors have sought to capitalize on the withdrawal of USAID from your regions. Finally, I would highlight recent press reports that suggest President Trump may soon remake the entire U.S. combatant command structure, including dismantling AFRICOM and merging it under EUCOM. This would be a mistake and, I believe, a harmful decision. Gentlemen, please provide your assessment of the harm to the U.S. vital interests if we reduce our engagements in Europe and Africa and the opportunity that would provide for competitors like Russia and China. Thank you again for your service, for your leadership, for your sacrifice, and thank your families also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Which one of you wants to go first? General Cavoli.
General Langley has volunteered me, Chairman. Thank you.
You are recognized.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of this committee, it's an honor to be here today, along with Sergeant Major Rob Abernathy, to represent the men and women of U.S. European Command, and it's a privilege to be here sitting beside my friend, General Mike Langley. Chairman, thank you, and Ranking Member Reed, thank you for your condolences regarding our soldiers who were tragically lost. They have all been recovered. I would like to take a moment to salute the American leadership there, from General Donahue to General Taylor to General Norrie, all of whom have done a fantastic job. I would also like publicly to thank our Lithuanian allies and our Polish allies who left no stone unturned to help us recover those soldiers and who bent over backwards to give us every single thing we needed. The Minister of Defense of Lithuania was on site every single day to make sure that her country was giving us what we could. If we did a repatriation ceremony today, bringing the soldiers out, the streets were lined with Lithuanian citizens expressing goodwill and alliance with us. And I would commend that video clip to any member of this committee or any American, and I thank them. Before I begin, let me thank the committee, of course, for all your support to our service members and our mission over the years that I have served here. So we continue to face a very historic time in the European theater. Russia's war in Ukraine, now in its 4th year, has revealed Russia to be a chronic threat, and we see in the future it will be a growing threat, one that is willing to use military force to achieve its geopolitical goals and is today actively waging a campaign of destabilization across Europe and beyond. Further exacerbating this threat from Russia are the deepening partnerships among our adversaries, Iran, the Communist Chinese Party, the DPRK, and Russia itself, and these are increasingly posing a global risk. But U.S. EUCOM and the NATO alliance have arisen to the challenge. NATO deterrence has held. War has not spilled into NATO territory. With support from a broad international coalition, U.S. European Command led the charge in helping Ukraine. We established Security Assistance Group Ukraine, now commanded by Lieutenant General Curtis Buzzard. And for 38 months of this war, SAGU has delivered critical munitions, arms, and equipment from the U.S. and our allies to the Ukrainians. These efforts have been indispensable in enabling the Ukrainian armed forces, and they have empowered them to mount a courageous defense. And now NATO has taken up this task as well, establishing in record time an organization to take over much of SAGU's mission. The threat of war has also led the NATO alliance to embark upon an historic campaign to fundamentally overhaul and modernize its military capabilities. After years of underinvestment, too many years, our allies are finally optimizing the alliance for high-end war fighting. And within NATO, we now have the plans, the command and control, and increasingly the forces, and we have the focus to meet that mission. And while there's still much to do, our allies are investing at a rate we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War, a 40% increase in spending since February of 2022. And throughout this intense and challenging transformation, the presence of U.S. EUCOM forces has been essential to the alliance's modernization efforts. We've converged U.S. headquarters with NATO command structures. We've increased combined training and exercises, and we've been accelerating European modernization and readiness. Through U.S. leadership, we are laying the groundwork for European leadership, and thus for more years of peace and prosperity for the United States of America. It's a long road ahead, and a sustained vigilance and pressure will be required, but we will get there. This has been to protect vital U.S. interests. Our strengthened allies will increase our strength, and our deep relationships give us the access, the basing, and the intelligence necessary to do this. The first line of defense of our homeland begins in EUCOM, where our naval forces prevent Russian submarines from breaking out into the Atlantic. U.S. ballistic missile defense of Israel starts with EUCOM ships positioned in the Eastern Mediterranean. And it's our job in EUCOM safely to evacuate Americans from the Levant. We are America's force forward in the world. So as the chairman and the ranking member noted, ladies and gentlemen, this is my last annual testimony to you as I'm closing 38 years of service this summer. It's been really the honor of a lifetime to serve with our brilliant service members during these historic times. I continue to be inspired by their commitment to our nation's forward defense. And I thank you, the Congress, for your unwavering support to our servicemen and women, to their well-being, and to their vital mission. America is the greatest country in the world, and it is in large part because of our armed forces, which are the finest in the world. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very, very much, General. General Langley.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished committee members, it's an honor to appear here today representing the outstanding service members civilians, and families of United States Africa Command. As I get closer to the end of my tenure of command, I remain in awe of the character and capabilities of the men and women willing to serve our nation. Our team of soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, guardians, and civilians perform valiantly, and I'm honored and proud to serve with them. Point be known, America remains in good hands. I'm proud to testify with my good friend, General Chris Cavoli, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and the Commander of the United States European Command. I'd like to extend my gratitude for his steadfast cooperation. As you know, EUCOM and AFRICOM share service components, and every day our teams are coordinating to solve some of our nation's toughest security issues. Also joining me today is a key member of the AFRICOM team, my command senior enlisted, Sergeant Major Michael Woods, United States Marine Corps. His 32 years of experience provide me with the critical insight needed to understand the operating environment. And he shows our partners what true non-commissioned officer leadership looks like. I'm lucky to serve with him. Now, everything we do at the United States Africa Command has one overarching goal in mind: achieving peace through strength. Now, this requires three things: a clear understanding of national security threats, a robust and dependable network of like-minded allies and partners, and appropriate resourcing to match military requirements. Now, as I've said in previous testimony, Africa remains a nexus theater from which the United States cannot shift its gaze. It is home to terrorists who take advantage of conditions in Africa to grow and export their ideology. ISIS controls their global network from Somalia. It is where the Chinese Communist Party actively works to change the international rules-based order as a stepping stone to become the global hegemon. And it's where the Russian Federation seizes opportunities created by chaos and instability. Now, to protect our homeland and the United States' interests, we must deter these nations and their malign actors from their goals on the African continent. Many of our security and economic interests overlap with those of our African and European partners. Successful outcomes enabled by burden sharing are beneficial for all. And as a posture-limited theater, AFRICOM, we establish strength and work towards peace by enhancing the security capabilities of our African partners through a robust system of alliances, exercises, training events, security cooperation, and foreign military sales programs are the backbone of our military activities on the continent. Through these activities, our forces lead by example with a warrior ethos and stand by our partners and enhance trust in the United States military. So the United States Africa Command seeks to match these capabilities with the current and emerging threats to ensure the security of our forces while advancing American interests. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, crisis response forces, counter-unmanned aerial system technology, and integrated air missile defense platforms are critical to accomplish our mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome your advocacy in ensuring that the necessary tools are in AFRICOM's hands. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you both for your excellent testimony. We're going to try to stay strictly to the 5-minute rule in our question and answer. I probably, Senator Reid, am going to take a second round myself, but we'll stick to the 5 minutes going forward. General Cavoli, how long have you been watching Russia closely?
Chairman, I began my Russia specialty in 1995 when I spent a year at the Defense Language Institute learning to speak and read and write the language, and I've paid attention to it and worked in jobs associated with it ever since.
You're
So
not
30 years.
you're not only conversational, but fluent in Russian. Is that correct?
I have always maintained that rating.
Yes. Well, give us your assessment now, first of all, of what we have learned, what our military has learned during this 2.5 years of conflict in Ukraine. What have we learned about Russia's military? Where are they now? And Ukraine's military capability and where they are now?
Chairman, we've learned an awful lot. First of all, I should point out that early on in the conflict, all of the services and the Joint Force established a variety of cells and organizations deliberately to study the lessons of the conflict. And we've had everything from publications about it to seminars on it at a classified and unclassified level. And we have learned an awful lot. Some of the things that we have gained as a military are well, they're technical, they're procedural, and they're sort of large-scale operations focused. So technically, for example, we have learned an awful lot about Russian measures and countermeasures and how to counter countermeasures, a lot of technical stuff. We've seen a lot of growth in both the Russian capability and the Ukrainian capability in electromagnetic warfare, electronic warfare, and we have learned from that, and we have modified many of our procedures. I think you're familiar with the U.S. Army's Transformation and Contact Initiative. That is really based on lessons learned from Ukraine. As a short example, our use of drones has changed deeply across the Joint Force. Before this conflict in the U.S. Army, for example, we had very few but large drones associated with large units. Now we're proliferating smaller drones to smaller units and having a larger number of drones in lower and lower hands. Fundamental change in the way we're doing business. There are many, many other technical and tactical lessons we've learned. At a meta level, sir, I would say some of the big lessons we've learned are about scale. The scale of this conflict is just awe-inspiring. Thousands of tanks destroyed on both sides. The Russians have lost more than 4,000 tanks, which is the inventory almost of the United States tank corps. So the need for replacement, for depth of magazine, for resilience, all these are lessons that we're learning, and I believe the services are programming it as the years go forward. So we've learned a lot.
Before you continue, in February of 22, we would not have dreamed of such a loss from Russia of tanks, would we?
We would not have. I did not anticipate the war to go this long, and I did not anticipate Ukraine to be able to destroy so much of Russia's warfighting capability.
I hope I didn't break your train of thought, so continue.
No, so as we watch the Russians, we see that their level of skill in some technical areas is very high and is evolving during the course of the war, but it's mainly isolated in specific pockets. It does not appear to be generalizable across the force, and overall, the quality of their force, especially their ground force, has been decreasing throughout the conflict. On the Ukrainian side, we see sort of the opposite. We see a military that started pretty much from an almost cold start. We had been helping them before the war, but not at the scale we began to after the war, and they've evolved and developed very, very quickly. So we've learned a lot about institutional adaptation from watching both sides as well.
If we or our NATO allies had to face Russia ourselves in a conflict, because of what we learned, would we be exponentially better off today because of the lessons we've learned in the last 2.5 years?
Oh yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Say a word or two in half a minute about the Russian economy.
So the Russian economy has been both bolstered and distorted by this war. Specifically, the Russian government has had to turbocharge their defense sector. And in so doing, they have created a very strong inflationary pressures throughout the economy, but especially in the civil sector. They've responded to that with high interest rates to hold inflation down. The central banker, Elvira Nabiulina, has the overnight rate, the prime rate is over 21% right now. That is choking off the viability of the civil economy. So one has a huge oversized defense sector, but an anemic civil sector. And that defense sector, as you know, Chairman, is not a productive not a productive economy for the nation. It's productive for the fighting of the war, but beyond that, it has pretty much swamped things out. It appears that it will be very difficult to unwind such an imbalance, and we'll need to consider that as we go forward.
Thank you, sir. We'll continue this conversation. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. General Langley, the presence of the United States on the African continent is not significantly military. In fact, we don't have any troops there at all, but we do have, until recently, a State Department and a USAID presence. Can you indicate to us how valuable that presence has been to you?
Senator, as you know, heretofore, we had a whole of government approach in some of the challenges on the African continent, and we used that in past years. Now, given that USAID and a number of capabilities are being folded under the State Department, we continue to look at ways to be able to leverage that in U.S. government pressure on especially our competitors in achieving our strategic goals.
Thank you. General Cavoli, could you give the committee a brief assessment of the battlefield? We hear a lot about Ukraine's challenges, but as I understand it, they are still holding significant territory. They are taking the fight to the Russians and innovating on the battlefield daily.
Sure, Senator Reid. All of the above is true. So if we take just a moment and go down the front line of troops, if you don't mind. So if we start in the northern part of the battlefield, the active battlefield area, that's the place where Ukraine last summer pushed an advance into Russia in an area called Kursk. And they took a large part of Kursk. This is where the Russians introduced North Korean troops to help push the Ukrainians back out. They set an original goal of the end of September to have the Ukrainians out of Kursk. The Ukrainians today are still in Kursk. There is a sizable force holding a sizable, diminished, but sizable chunk of ground inside Russia in Kursk Oblast right now, and they're holding on very good defensive terrain. South of there, in Belgorod, the Ukrainians a couple of weeks ago pushed a smaller counteroffensive back into Russia. So we still have a back and forth going up in that area. If we come down inside of Ukraine to some of the big battlefields up in Luhansk, and first of all, there's the city just west of the old Bakhmut called Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainians and the Russians have been fighting over this city and the city to the south of it, Toretsk, for about 8 months now. In recent weeks, the Russian offensives have sort of petered out. They had been decreasing in scale, moving from company size to platoon size, now basically small groups of infantrymen trying to rush forward under artillery fire, and they have failed to gain ground in the last couple of weeks. In fact, the Ukrainians have taken a little bit of ground back from them. If we come farther south from that, we get to Pokrovsk in Donetsk province, where the Russians continue to try to take Pokrovsk. They are stalled out on their axes trying to encircle it. They got pretty close, but the Ukrainians have held the Russians back. That's on the ground. The Russians seem to be suffering from a paucity of armored vehicles and a lack of manpower. The Ukrainians on their side have assumed very strong defensive positions, well dug in, and appear to have solved some of their manpower problems that were so acute last autumn. They've increased the pool of people available for mobilization. They've increased the pool of people available for voluntary recruitment, and they've done a good job squeezing people out of headquarters to the front. If we look in other domains, both sides are relying on long-range attack. The Russians largely with cruise missiles and glide bombs, and the Ukrainians are relying mainly on one-way attack drones, as well as some indigenously produced cruise missile systems, one in particular that I've got in mind that we could talk about in closed session, sir. I hope that helped.
It does, sir. If the administration withholds war material, spare parts, and particularly intelligence advice, what would be the effect on the Ukrainian forces?
First of all, it would obviously have a rapid and deleterious effect on their ability to fight, Senator. The Ukrainians depend on us principally, uniquely, I should say, for their high-end anti-aircraft systems. So the things that shoot down the ballistic missiles and the long-range attack missiles that the Russians throw at them almost daily, that is mainly supplied by the United States. That would have an obvious effect. If the Ukrainians were not able to receive intelligence from us, they would struggle to target, especially in depth, operational level targets such as command post, logistics areas, and things like that, which require a specific you've got to have very good intelligence to do that, and they would struggle to do that. I do have to note that the Ukrainians have developed alternative sources. Many of our allies have stepped up their ability to produce things for the Ukrainians. Czechia this month is delivering more than 70,000 rounds of 155. So there are some real advances. There's some diversification of their supply sources, but undoubtedly the Ukrainians are very dependent on our assistance.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Langley and General Cavoli, thank you both for your many years of service to this country. General Cavoli, you serve as both the commander of the U.S. European Command and also as the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. That means you are responsible for the overall command of NATO military operations and forces, including the United States nuclear forces that are deployed to those NATO countries. NATO is a nuclear alliance. Our deterrence strategy has worked for over 75 years. Having an American serve as Supreme Allied Commander of Europe has been a key part of that strategy. General, can you at this level of classification walk us through how command and control of U.S. nuclear forces in Europe works today, including your role?
Absolutely, Senator. So to keep it at a very open level, the United States has always offered a certain amount of nuclear force to NATO to be employed by SAC here. So we have some nuclear weapons that in a conflict, upon the agreement of the United States and the rest of the nations, would be turned over to SAC here to be delivered by a variety of nations who are involved in this program, all of them NATO nations. That all happens under the command and control of SACEUR. If SACEUR were not an American officer, we would have to find some other way to do that, and it would certainly not be as integrated with the rest of SACEUR's operations as it is now. So, yeah, I basically, as the American commander, have those weapons in my possession, and at the time of need, as instructed, I would pass them to myself as the Supreme Allied Commander to employ in accordance with the 32 nations.
It sounds to me like the way the command works right now, we don't have a middleman involved in this. It would be you as an American commander in consultation with the president, the commander-in-chief, who could, I believe, more easily and also with more knowledge make decisions affecting the use of our nuclear weapons. Would you say that's correct assumption
yes,
on my part?
That's correct, because I am able to rehearse these procedures, both in the American system. I work very closely with General Cotton, for instance, from U.S. Stratcom. We can rehearse those procedures on a U.S. basis. We rehearse the delivery procedures on a NATO basis, and I and key American elements of my staff at the NATO headquarters, at Supreme Allied Headquarters Europe, we are able to be the link in that chain that makes it seamless.
Thank you. The GIUK gap, sir, it's always been a critical maritime choke point, but it has recently grown in its strategic importance to NATO in light of the increase we're seeing with Russian submarine patrols in the Atlantic. What do you see, General, as the largest challenges with respect to the GIUK gap?
The biggest challenge is there, ma'am, at an unclassified level, just the quantity of stuff we have, the quantity of equipment and the quantity of forces we have available to monitor the underwater activity there and to counter it. It's important to understand that the U.S. has a unique role here. We have capabilities that our allies do not have. They have capabilities in numbers that we need to augment ours, so we work very closely together, but the U.S. component of those efforts is absolutely fundamental.
Thank you, General. General Langley, as we're considering Africa under your command, we have seen, I believe, an increase with the Chinese presence on the continent, economic developments, military activities, investments on the continent. Do you see, or what would you see as the greatest concern to U.S. security and also to regional stability in the area with regard to the actions that we are observing with the Chinese?
Sir, I see three lines of operations by the CCP. One, from geostrategic and their basing initiatives. As you well know, Dorley in Djibouti is their first start, and as the chairman talked about in his assessment. Then also other basing initiatives across the continent of Africa. Then their geopolitical line of effort in trying to dislodge the overall leadership in their quest to be the regional hegemon, as we start to look at their activities in the UN and trying to get geopolitical advantage over the West. And then also geoeconomic. They treasure critical minerals. They need those critical minerals, not only for their defense industrial base, but also for their greater industrial base. Those lines of efforts are what we're watching closely because they want to be the global hegemon.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to General Cavoli and General Langley for being here this morning and for your many years of service to the country. I want to follow up on Senator Reid's question about USAID's presence in Africa, or lack thereof, now that this administration has closed down virtually all of the operations in Africa. This is the fastest growing continent in the world. It is a place where we're seeing increasing incursion by the Chinese, as you pointed out. So as we have withdrawn our presence from countries in Africa, are you seeing additional Chinese presence come in to take over some of those services and programs that the United States has been providing? For example, in Rwanda, we had a program to help with children, women and children, and the challenges of childbirth. My understanding is that now that we have left that program, that the Chinese have come in to take it over. Are you seeing that in places?
Sir, I am seeing that. You know, there's a number of programs that we see that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to replicate. They can't do what we do. They can't do what we do in PEPFAR, where they extended the life span of a number of Africans by 20 years. They're trying to replicate that. They're trying to match what we do. So that's what we're seeing as we start to fold in the capabilities of USAID under State Department. China's trying to exploit that scene.
And do you agree that it would be a huge loss if we don't continue many of those programs?
Senator, I won't speak to the policy part of that, but it is a need. Those capabilities are needed for the U.S. To maintain a strategic advantage over the Chinese Communist Party because we do it best. And the Africans, they speak that they do prefer the United States.
Thank you. General Cavoli, I want to follow up on Senator Fisher's question about the role of the SACEUR in NATO and in Europe and the importance of that role in terms of nuclear weapon command and control. And partly because what we're hearing is rumors from the administration that they're thinking about eliminating that dual hat responsibility. I'm not going to ask you to comment on the policy point there, but how concerned would you be about the lack of control of nuclear weapons, especially should Article 5 be invoked?
We would want those under the command of a U.S. officer, ma'am.
Thank you.
Clearly.
And Senator Reid and Senator Wicker both asked you a number of questions about Ukraine and where the war is now, and you were very forthcoming about that. As we look at potential negotiations on trying to end that war, what is the best leverage that we can have with Putin and Russia in terms of positioning Ukraine to be able to come to a negotiating table with a position of strength?
Senator, I'd hate to try to insert myself into the negotiation process, which I'm not a part of, but I do think.
Right, I'm really asking for your military.
So continuing to assist Ukraine on the battlefield daily, I think, is very important. Continuing to enlist not just the material assistance, but the unity of our allies in this effort to support Ukraine, I think is also an important function to be done. I'll leave it to the administration to determine how to achieve leverage against the other side.
Thank you. And as we talked briefly on the way in about the situation in the Western Balkans, and particularly in Serbia and in Bosnia-Herzegovina, while Mr. Dodik has left the Republic of Srpska for the time being and is in Russia, can you speak to the ability of the EUFOR mission there to be able to take over should there be any outbreak of violence? And then also, if you could address KFOR and Kosovo and Serbia as well.
Sure, Senator. So with regard to Bosnia, yeah, good and bad that Mr. Dodik has left the scene for a little bit. We're working through that day by day. As you know, the Operation Althea, the EU mission, the one step above commander of that is, for the EU, is my vice chief of staff, a French 3-star named Hubert Cottereau. So we talk about, his office is about 10 feet from mine. We talk about this every single week. We feel comfortable with the level of forces they have available now. I'm grateful to France especially for responding quickly with unpreviously committed forces to help. Last summer, they sent the Charles de Gaulle and 2 parachute battalions to show force in the area. So I think we're in a pretty good place there. I think Hubert and the EU know the various ways things could spiral up there, and we can handle that. From the U.S. EUCOM side, I do meter in and out training forces, our forces to train, who, while not operational, certainly have a stabilizing effect as they go in and out. Kosovo, as you know, KFOR remains on the ground, 4,300 soldiers on the ground right now, of whom less than 600 are American. That is a place where our Italian and allies have really been carrying a lot of the weight. We have had reserve forces deployed in there to handle the elevated tensions for about a year now. We're expanding the size of the permanent force in order to relieve those forces, those reserve forces, and I believe we'll come to agreement on that very quickly and get that source. The key nations really involved there are Italy, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and Hungary, who have been extremely responsive with their reserve forces.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Let me observe I'm doing a poor job of enforcing the 5-minute rule. But General Langley, let me just follow up for a moment. As we dial back USAID in Africa, China's not dialing back the Belt and Road Initiative anywhere in Africa, are they?
Chairman, China is responding by trying to replicate what capabilities USAID was very successful across a number of years. They're trying to replicate that, whether it's in health diplomacy or any development type programs. They're trying to use that as extension of the Belt and Road Initiative to gain favor by the African countries.
And they, would you say it's not principally altruistic on the part of the Chinese communists?
Chairman, I'd say that they've made some missteps in the last couple of weeks, especially in Zambia with that spillage into the river that affects 5 million people. So they're getting a horrible start using a track analogy.
But they do it in their own self-interest, the Chinese.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And Senator Cotton, you are now recognized with the apology of the chair.
Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for your service to the country. I know you'll be sad not to get to come here and testify in front of the committee anymore after today. General Cavoli, in his first term, President Trump withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Finally, after years of Russian cheating with impunity, that's allowed our military to develop longer-range missiles. The Army has been developing the long-range hypersonic weapon, a ground-launched missile that has a range of up to, well, it has a long range, I'll put it that way. It appears that the Army's first multi-domain task force in the Pacific is slated to get this weapon first. Do you see a role for the long-range hypersonic weapon in EUCOM?
I do, Senator Cotton. I think it would be very useful. I think coming out of the INF Treaty was a very important move, and it's one that we now should capitalize on in all the relevant theaters. The Army's multi-domain task force long-range fires battalion is the real key component. It's got several systems in, as I think you know, and there is a move to, there is a request out there to place one of those in Europe that I could get into in closed session in detail with you if you'd like, sir.
Okay, thank you. General Langley, the Trump administration has conducted multiple airstrikes against al-Shabaab targets since taking office. What's your current assessment of the threat that al-Shabaab poses to our national interest and specifically to the U.S. homeland?
Senator, al-Shabaab is especially a heightened terrorist threat, namely because they're colluding with the Houthis across from Yemen. And so we're watching that closely. The President and the Secretary of Defense has given me expanded authorities. I can talk about those details as far as expanded authorities, but I will say we're hitting them hard. I have now had the capability to hit them harder.
Okay, al-Shabaab is in the Horn of Africa on the East Coast. There's obviously other terrorists operating throughout Africa associated with al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. What's your assessment of the threats that all those terrorists on the African continent pose, and again specifically pose to the U.S. homeland?
Senator, left unchecked, they will have a direct threat on the homeland, whether it's just their networks or even their ideology. We remember 1 January 2025, what happened in New Orleans. Still, there are some that have been indoctrinated by this false ideology of Islam.
Okay. General Cavoli, coming back to you, outside of your AOR, but I think perhaps with some follow-on effects, the Assad tyranny fell late last year. That has imperiled Russia's access to its naval base in Syria. There have been reports that Russia is looking to replace that base elsewhere in the Mediterranean, including potentially in Libya. How do you assess the situation in the Mediterranean and Russia's access to the Mediterranean since the fall of Assad?
Senator, they've suffered a big loss. They've suffered the ability to maintain sustained maritime operations in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's much more difficult for them now. They are searching, and I'll let Mike talk about this if you'd like to, sir. They're searching for alternative basing to replace Tartus, which they've mainly lost on the north shore of Africa. They've failed so far to achieve a long-term agreement for a major base. So this will be significant. It's significant not only because we have a reduced presence of submarines, Russian submarines in the Eastern Mediterranean now. It's also surface vessels that find it harder to do sustained operations. And finally, it's much more difficult for Russia to sustain the operations, both overt and covert operations that they're doing in Africa without those bases. And the Alliance and U.S. EUCOM are both taking actions to try to make sure we keep them boxed.
General Langley, anything to add?
Yes, Senator. I watched Maghreb closely. Russia now does have initiatives because that is NATO's southern flank, from Morocco to Algeria and even Tunisia and Libya. I engage with them closely for shared objectives of denying the militarization of NATO's southern flank.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my thanks to both of you for your decades of service. I did want to mention the concerns that our European allies must have regarding what happened with Signalgate. So U.S. officials, including Vice President Vance and Secretary of Defense Hicks, said this is for General Cavoli, use Signal to communicate classified Yemen strike plans, putting the lives of our service members at risk. And in addition to sharing classified material on an unsecure network, the Vice President and Secretary of Defense spoke contemptuously about our European allies. I think both of you very much know how important our allies are and how important it is for us to continue to strengthen our relationships with our allies. So it certainly doesn't help when we have our leaders in an unconscionable way being contemptuous of them. General Cavoli, do you think sharing operation plans on unclassified systems puts our warfighters at risk?
Ma'am, we have protocols to handle classified information. We adhere to them to the extent that we're capable. When there's a failure in that, we, of course, investigate it.
Answer is yes?
Yeah.
Have you heard from our European allies? Have any of them indicated to you their concerns about the security breach on our part?
No, not directly. I've not had anybody ask me about that or talk to me about that.
What do you think they are thinking regarding the security breach?
Ma'am, it's hard for me to put myself into their
Is
heads.
it reassuring to them?
It's hard. It's hard. I can't, characterize their thoughts, ma'am.
So none of them actually said to you, what is going on?
No, if one
in the
did, I
United
would, of course,
States?
tell you.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty surprising. Don't we share intel with our European allies?
Of course, it's one of the most important parts of our alliance and our bilateral relationships.
Do you think that the security breach that occurred with Signalgate is reassuring to our allies in terms of their willingness to share security information with us?
Senator, again, it's hard for me to characterize as somebody else's thoughts, but I have not had anybody pull back any of our intelligence sharing agreements, ma'am.
I find that surprising, but nonetheless, I hope so. There have been recent news reports that the Pentagon is considering combining AFRICOM and EUCOM into one command. For both of you, what is your best military advice on the strategic, operational, and resource implications of such a merger? General Langley?
Senator, I won't speculate on the evolving policy, but I will say this. I'll just give comparison of the relevance of AFRICOM and our mission. Back in 2007, when we were stood up, we looked at the challenges across the globe, and especially the challenge of terrorism. At that time, the global presence of terrorism on the African continent was 2%. Senator, today it's 43%. And then even adding on to a geostrategic type of perspective of our great power competitions, both Russia, Federation, and the Chinese Communist Party activities on the African continent is grand. So my responsibilities are great. So for a combat commander, it would be a daunting task for integration.
So would you agree that General Cavoli, that the challenges as General Langley put it, have increased in Africa, not decreased, and making it even more important that this combatant command continues?
Ma'am, the challenges in Africa have increased exponentially over the last 10 years. Not just the terrorism that was there during the previous period of the last 20 years, but the increasing activity of Russia and China. Yeah, there are a lot of problems there, ma'am, and I'm satisfied with the problems I have in EUCOM.
Would you like to share your thoughts on yet another potential change being contemplated by the administration, and that is to give up our role as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander?
Yes, ma'am. I think that would bring some challenges in terms of nuclear command and control. It would put us in a position where in an Article 5 situation, we could have, for the first time since the First World War, large numbers of American troops under non-U.S. command. So I think those are things that would have to be considered carefully.
Giving up this command, in fact, could really endanger our national security. That's what I hear you saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Horonos. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by just thanking both of you for your service to our country and to your families. We sometimes forget about the sacrifice they make when you are away, and we most certainly appreciate all of that. And once again, we appreciate what you have done and continue to do for this country. General Cavoli, our missile defense systems protect not just the U.S. homeland, but our deployed forces overseas, for example, in Europe and in the Middle East. Does EUCOM make use of any of the systems which require the use of the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz band of the spectrum to fully operate? And I'm just curious. This is something that I've asked every four-star uniformed officer as they've come before us, because there has been an attempt most recently to take away the exclusive use by the Department of Defense for the use of that part of the spectrum and literally to sell it for commercial purposes. Huge amounts of activity with regard to some of the best physics in the world for radar and so forth are found in there. Can you share a little bit about what EUCOM does and whether or not it would impact any of our capabilities in Europe?
Yeah, we sure do use it, Senator. We use it principally in our air and missile defense systems, as you pointed out, which are part of the system that protects the United States homeland from ballistic missile attacks. So more than that, I could go into in classified session, but it is a source that would have to be worked out if we lost access to that bandwidth,
Are you familiar with some of the physics involved in why we picked that particular part for our radars and so forth?
I would never volunteer just how familiar I am with physics, but yes, a little bit.
Okay. Just with regard to that, I mean, there is a reason why that particular part of the spectrum is being so closely protected by the Department of Defense. Is that fair to say?
There is.
Thank you. General Cavoli, also, can you describe how the Ukrainian armed forces, as well as their defense industrial base, have evolved over time, and just a little bit in terms of what you've observed?
Wow, sure, Senator. So in 2014, I was a one-star commanding our training enterprise in Germany and throughout Europe. And in 2015, I was given the task to help to set up a training center in Western Ukraine for the Ukrainians as a response to the invasion and the annexation of Crimea that had taken place in 2014. At the time, they were, a hand-to-mouth army that was tied in a tight fight in their eastern area and had suffered from 30 years of post-Soviet neglect. They were in tough shape. Between then and 2022, they managed, while maintaining a fight in the east, they managed to convert themselves into the force that was able to stop Russia. This came with a number of important decisions from the United States, specifically an increase in aid and the initiation of lethal aid, the donation of javelins. I believe it was in about 2016 or 2017 we gave that. Since then, you know the trajectory, sir. They went from being basically Minutemen with javelins stopping a Russian invasion to being an organized force that is increasingly able to generate force in a reliable and predictable fashion. Very difficult to do, especially on the fly. It's taken a couple of years to get it going. And they've developed a defense industry that is producing many of their own munitions right now. In fact, I would say they're the world leaders in one-way attack drone technology.
Interesting. As you've watched this and observed this, you've watched what Russia has done as well. What would be your assessment of how Russia would react to a conflict between the United States and China?
I think clearly whatever the United States does in the world, Russia will find a way or will look for a way to turn the situation to its advantage and to seize opportunity. So depending on the exact parameters of a conflict with China, exactly what the conditions were, I would expect Russia to try to take advantage of that either in the information domain or even physically.
Would it be fair to say that if we found ourselves in a theater conflict in the Pacific Rim region, highly strong possibility that we'd also find ourselves in a conflict in the European theater as well?
Or other theaters as well, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. General Langley, I did have questions for you, but I will put them in the record. I thank you for your service as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Rounds. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based upon the testimony this morning, I'd like to move we extend the terms of these two generals for another 4 years.
Without objection.
Sorry, fellas. The bad news is you get to tell your family. I have to point out, Mr. Chairman, that in the hour that we've been sitting here, investors in the United States stock market have lost $2.5 trillion, and I think that's something that should be noted. General Cavoli, it appears that the Russians and President Putin are engaged in what they consider a kind of waiting game, a grinding down in the conflict in Ukraine. Are the Ukrainians destined to lose?
No, Senator. Thank you for the question because I think it's an important one. There's nothing inevitable in war. And the Ukrainians are in very strong defensive positions right now and are improving weekly their ability to generate force and to reinforce those positions. It is hard sitting here right now to envision a major Ukrainian offensive that clears everybody, out of every square inch of Ukraine. But likewise, it's very hard to envision Ukraine collapsing and losing that conflict. I do not think there's an inevitability to a Ukrainian loss.
And a follow-up question, and you touched on this in answers to Senator Rounds. Describe the Ukrainians' evolution of their force over the course of this conflict. My sense is they've really gone, as I think you mentioned, Minutemen with a rifle to a really serious modern military force.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. So in the beginning, they had a certain number of organized brigades in the east. But what really kicked in was sort of volunteers who spontaneously came in, organized under officer leadership. General Syrski north of Kiev was key in stopping that advance toward Hostomel and then back out, pushing the Russians out of Bucha. They evolved from that. They consolidated that into Soviet-style brigades, which they were used to, with Soviet equipment. And then coming through late 22 and 23, we could see that equipment, and especially their artillery ammunition of a Soviet caliber, was gonna be exhausted. And so we had to help them convert to a largely Western-equipped and almost exclusively Western artillery-equipped force, which is pretty complicated. We operate off of a different aiming circle.
They've been effective in making that transition.
It's amazing. To do that under fire, under the pressure, one of the world's largest armies, it's a fantastic feat.
Let me change the subject entirely for a minute. Please discuss Russian and Chinese activities in the Arctic and the risks in the Arctic. It strikes me that this is a looming threat area that we should be addressing. And I should mention, the reason it's becoming so important is the melting of the Arctic ice, which has something to do with climate change. 70% of the Arctic ice has disappeared in the last 40 years. So talk to me about the strategic importance of the Arctic.
Absolutely, Senator. So from the U.S. perspective, the most important thing to understand is the shortest distance from Russian airfields to the United States is over the polar cap.
And they are building up those airfields, are they not?
They are. They were before the war at a fast pace. It's slowed down a little bit during the war, but they're still opening airfields and repairing existing ones. The other thing that comes out of the Arctic, sir, the Northern Fleet in Murmansk comes up, sails down through the GI-UK gap and breaks out or tries to break out into the Atlantic, from which they can hold key U.S. targets at risk with sub-launch cruise missiles, among other weapons.
So we should be paying particular attention to the Arctic as a new domain, if you will, of potential conflict.
And I think we are. The U.S. Northern Command, so General Guillot, has the primary U.S. responsibility for it. But of course, Strategic Command also has activities up there. EUCOM has activities up there because so much of the Arctic is in my AOR. And NATO, of course, you know, almost all of the nations in the Arctic Council are NATO nations. The only one that's not is Russia. So we've recently been sponsoring tabletop exercises to make sure we understand the details of command and control and coordination of operations there.
Thank you. General Langley, I'm out of time, but I'm very concerned about the rise of ISIS in the Sahel. That is a serious issue that we need to attend to, that we're talking about great power competition, China, Russia. We can't forget about terrorism. Is that correct?
Senator, that's correct. And the rise of ISIS by numbers in the Sahel, really more focused on the ISIS element that's in Somalia because of their networks. In the Sahel, they're growing in number, but not so much in capability. But we are still engaged, especially in coastal West Africa, of like-minded countries to deter that from the outside in.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Mr. Chairman.
that yes or no question,
Yeah, exactly.
Senator King. Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I want to express my condolences as well to the families of the four fallen, and as they begin their dignified transfer process, our hearts are with those, their family members, as well as the entire Third ID family. So General Cavoli, thank you for your respects to those family members. Let's just start and talk a little bit about leadership, because it has been brought up many times over. The situation that I believe is being contemplated between SACEUR and European Command. And you have expressed that you believe it is important to have American leadership in those positions. Is that true, General Cavoli?
Ma'am, that, of course, would be a policy decision. I merely laid out the advantages and disadvantages of it from a military perspective.
Thank you.
From a military perspective, problematic.
Thank you. I do believe it is important, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, but the Army definition of a leader is someone who inspires others to follow towards a common goal or objective for the good of the unit or the organization. And I would say, again, this is just me speaking, Senator Ernst, but I do think it is very important that America remains engaged on the world stage and that we exhibit that type of leadership in order to secure our own national defense. Would you also believe that, General Cavoli?
I do agree with that, and I see it every day that our allies crave our leadership and are stronger with it, and they're stronger for us.
Thank you. And General Langley, I shared a quote with you yesterday. It is, an American soldier is a hero standing still. And I looked it up. It is General Patton that gave us that quote. Can you talk, because you mentioned something about the convening, really the convening ability of our United States military. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, Senator. You know, as the Chinese Communist Party and even the Russian Federation are trying to encroach upon what we do as far as influence and cooperation with our African partners, they pale in comparison. You know, as evidenced by what we do in our conferences that we hold, or moreover, the exercises we have, whether it's Obigami Express. all those countries, a number of countries in the 40 plus, are always wanting to be part of it. Same thing as far as our Express series, and we get our maritime members because of the illicit activities that China is doing in IUU fishing. All those qualities and shared objectives gives us a convening power and influence on the African continent. There's no better type partner that the Africans can have in the United States.
No, thank you for that. And I remember a story that was shared with me a number of years ago by a special operator that was in charge of a small tactical unit. And they were brought into that situation because there were many warring factions in this particular area. The French were there, a few other nations were there as well, but none of them could get along, and they couldn't come together in a cohesive, collaborative engagement. It took the Americans coming into that situation and providing leadership and guidance. And when that happened, all of those different factions were able to come together. So talking about Americans being a convening authority, I think is exceptional. It is true. So again, I will just stress how important I think it is that the United States remain engaged on the world stage and provide that leadership. We don't have to provide all the boots on the ground, but certainly I think American leadership is valuable. General Cavoli, I'll go back to you. In reference to the war in Ukraine and Russia, again, another story that I will share with you. When I deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom as a transportation company commander, we occupied a base in Kuwait. We ran convoys through Kuwait and southern Iraq. On this subcamp in Kuwait, half was occupied by Americans. Can you imagine who would occupy the other half of that camp? You don't have to know this. The other half of the camp was occupied by Ukrainian soldiers. Why were the Ukrainians there? They were not part of NATO, correct? Can you guess why they were there?
Probably because we asked them to be there, and they responded positively because of our leadership position in the world.
Absolutely. And I share that story because so many people don't realize that the Ukrainians were there for us when we needed them. Those men, it was all men actually, the Ukrainian men that were there, their soldiers, they were route clearing engineers. I was a transportation company commander. I am very grateful that the Ukrainians were there for us. I can't imagine how many American lives might have been saved by those Ukrainian soldiers. So again, I apologize for going over, but I just wanted to stress that we do not operate in a vacuum. No matter where we are, our country is safer because we exhibit leadership and we have the convening power to bring many nations together. And I thank you, gentlemen, for all that you do for our great nation in so many different ways. God bless you both. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you very much, Senator Ernst. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to associate myself with Senator Ernst's remarks and echo them when I was in Ukraine just a few weeks ago. One of the messages I heard from their head of intelligence, General Budanov, and others, is if we stick with them, they will stick with us. Wherever we need them to be, they will be there. And when you consider that they're literally fighting for their survival and fighting for their lives, to express to me how important our relationship was and what it means to them going forward. I think we have a friend we can always rely on. But I am concerned about, over the last few weeks, the politics around this conflict have gotten us off track. But I'm curious, General Cavoli, from your perspective, friction between President Zelensky and President Trump, how do you feel our Ukrainian allies are handling this right now? And What concerns do you hear directly from them about our ability to support them? I just had members of the Ukrainian parliament in my office, and we were talking specifics. We're talking about ATACMS rounds, HIMARS, PAC-3 rounds for Patriots, AIM-120s, 155 millimeter artillery rounds, GPS, these systems. Can you just give me a summary about where you think we are with our support, and what do they need to continue this fight?
Thank you, Senator Kelly. With me, my interlocutors, who are principally general officers or members of the Ministry of Defense, they're resolute. They're resolute, they're focused on a task, they have a defense to execute, and they talk to me about the practical aspects of that. You're correct, they do continue to depend on our support. Our support is in a wide variety of munitions, especially, but also the provision of intelligence. They're very eager to maintain those, and there are certain specific ones that I could talk about in closed session that are especially valuable. I did, however, earlier in open session mention air defense missiles as one of the most important, because we're basically the sole provider of those for them.
All right, thank you. And I want to move to General Langley for a second here. Good to see you again, too, General. AFRICOM has continued to experience conflict arising from the uptick in violent extremist organizations as our focus continues towards large-scale combat operations in Indo-PACOM and Europe. I'm concerned that our defense modernization and optimization will trend towards those theaters, but away from other issues that we can't ignore: the real threat of terrorism and gray zone operations, especially in AFRICOM. It's critical that we don't lose sight of this real threat. And you previously highlighted, General, your need for more ISR capability, calling ISR an active deterrent in Africa, yet we have limited platforms to go around. SOCOM has begun purchasing the OA-1K Skyraider aircraft, which I think could fill a requirement that you seem to have. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of an armed ISR platform like the OA-1K, especially one with a dual-use capability that could fill the close air support gap?
Senator, thank you. I will speak to the capabilities of various ISR platforms in Africa, especially as far as our operations, ongoing operations across Somalia and in support of the Somali National Army. So I'll just speak to the capabilities of the need for ISR, that armed ISR across makes sense and do responsible type targeting across the region. That's all too important. So I'll speak to the capabilities that every combatant commander needs more ISR in support of our operations.
And do you feel the OA-1K could fill a gap that you have in AFRICOM?
Sir, I'll take any additional ISR and any enhanced technologies that would add to the credibility and our lethality of our forces.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. There's a vote going on, and we actually have a series of 3 votes. The hearing will continue, and I'll pass the gavel to various members, but the hearing will not recess for the votes. Senator Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank both of you for what you do. Thank you for the men and women that work for you and serve with you. And I want to recognize and honor the 4 brave American heroes who lost their lives serving the country in Lithuania. So that has to be a tough day when that happens, and talking to their families. So, General Cavoli, can you talk a little bit about the importance of what Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are doing, in contrast to, historically at least, maybe Germany's finally going to show up and do their part. But can you talk about the importance of what they're doing along the eastern flank, and then in contrast to what the lack of investment that Germany's made in the past, and the importance of what these countries on the eastern flank are doing?
Sure, Senator. It's a great opportunity to talk about some of our allies, some of our newer allies, right? These are not plank owners. These are post-Warsaw Pact allies of the United States. Poland's at 4.7% of GDP, right? As a benchmark, we are at about 3.4%. So this is a country that has had very rapid economic growth sustained over the last 15 years and is committing it to correct an imbalance in their defensive capability. They're buying vast quantities of U.S. equipment, by the way, but more important, they're integrating it with the alliance and they're making it available to the alliance for collective defense, which is fantastic. They are rapidly becoming the bulwark of our ground defenses on the eastern flank, and their officer corps is stepping up to the task as well. If we come up through Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, every single one of those countries has come above 2%. Estonia is headed over 3%. 2 of the 3 countries have reintroduced at least limited conscription. They are building defensive fortifications, and they have extremely well integrated national defense plans with our NATO defense plans. Very, very active. I spend quite a bit of time there working with them on their plans. Finland, of course, Finland never looked away from its national defense requirements throughout years and years and years since the Winter War of 1939, and they have happily and seamlessly and quickly integrated their defense plans into our NATO defense plans. And in fact, they're contributing a 3-star land component command to handle the potential ground fight in the high north for us. So very grateful to those countries.
You want to talk about Germany?
Germany has performed as an ally for many decades, sir. During the Cold War, we know how strong they were. They, like many other nations in the alliance, took a holiday from readiness and force-sizing, and they're trying to correct that. It's a complicated situation politically, but I believe that Herr Merz, Friedrich Merz, has been able to negotiate as part of a future coalition. He'll be the future chancellor. He's been able to negotiate at long last an agreement to be able to use deficit spending to be able to finance more rapid growth, and we look forward to having that happen. They have very solid plans for expansion and for modernization. We just need to see it get going.
If you were placing troops in around the NATO alliance, American troops without any past, where would you move troops? If you didn't have to worry about existing physical structures, things like that?
Ultimately, what we would like to see is sufficiently robust national forces to be the basis of the defense of any part of the eastern flank. In some places, that's hard to see because just the nations are not large enough, the Baltic nations, for instance. The second thing we'd like to see in those places is a reinforcement by a multinational alliance force. We have that in the 3 Baltic countries. We would like to use U.S. forces to be able to deploy rapidly from on the continent responsively to the point of need. One of the differences between the Cold War and now is we were very sure where the battlefield would be during the Cold War. Now we have, 2,300 kilometers of expanse. The U.S. forces bring capabilities that nobody else has and can move the fastest, so I need them in locations where they can be trained, ready, and where they have the infrastructure and the political agreements, the international agreements, to be able to deploy quickly from.
All right. Thank you. Thank both of you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Tuberville.
Good morning. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service and good luck after retirement, but you're not done yet. General Langley, AFRICOM has historically suffered from shortfalls in manpower and ISR and security and all those things. Sounds like from your testimony that Africa's in trouble. 40% rise in terrorism. What's your most pressing need that you can tell us for what we can help you with?
Senator, thanks for that question. My number one operational priority is protection of the force. And so as I stipulated in my opening statement, I focused on matching capabilities to the threat. When we match capabilities to the threat, it first calls for integrated air missile defense, and it calls for ISR. And other platforms would add to the capacity and capability of protecting the force. In closed session, I would be able to elaborate with more specificity, but all combatant commanders always ask for those aforementioned type platforms.
Yeah, thank you. General Cavoli, how much closer today is Ukraine from this time last year winning this war against Russia?
They're in a much better position not to lose it, Senator Tuberville. They have shored up their defenses. They've assumed very strong defenses, and they've improved their force generation capability. So they're in a much better position than they were. Depending on what the objective is, of course, which has always been the question in this chamber as well as others, it would be hard for them to accomplish some things, but they're doing a good job of what they're trying to do now, which is hold their line.
But they're trying to win, right?
They're trying to win. They want to start by making sure Russia doesn't win.
Yeah, yeah. Status of the F-16s that we've sent? I know it's not classified because Russia obviously knows what's happened to them.
No, there are a number of F-16s in there. There are a number of pilots in there. There are more F-16s prepared to be deployed in there. There are more pilots in the training pipeline, sir. I can give you the numbers in closed session. They are active. The planes are active, and they fly every day. They've defeated a large number of cruise missile threats, and they've delivered an awful lot of offensive attacks as well, specifically bombing attacks in the east. None of the F-16s has been from the U.S., though. They've mainly been from Northern European countries, Netherlands, Denmark.
Status for Patriot systems that we've had there for several years?
Yep, they are up and running, sir. I can tell you exactly in closed session, but that has been, in my mind, a success story. Frankly, I was just a little bit dubious in the beginning. It's a complicated system. We train guys for a long, long time to be able to operate it. The Ukrainians put their best people against it and took to it like a fish to water. And in fact, we learned from some of their employment techniques right now.
How effective have the long-range missiles that we've allowed Ukrainians to shoot into Russia, how effective has that been?
Very.
In all areas?
Yeah, they've been extremely effective, sir. I could go into this in private session, but the United States makes some very good weaponry, and it's the ones we've donated have been very, very effective. In closed session, I'd be happy to talk to you about a few of the things they've done with it.
So, where do you think what's the status of Kursk as we speak today? After they've gone in, and obviously there's been a lot of battles, a lot of people killed, a lot of prisoners taken. Where does that stand?
There is a Ukrainian force that is holding on inside Kursk Oblast, inside Russia. They've got quite a bit of terrain. I'd give it to you in closed session, sir, and how many troops, but they've got a sizable force there, and they maintain a well-defended piece of terrain there. They've also augmented it with some terrain they recently captured just a few kilometers in Belgorod, just south of there.
So they gave up some, now they're taking it back? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. They've taken a little back farther south.
Thank you. Thank you for your service, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. General Cavoli, the Russians are nowhere near capable of making a big push right now, are they?
That is my assessment, Chairman.
Okay, and what nationality are the pilots of those F-16s?
They're Ukrainian.
Okay, and where were they trained?
They were trained in a variety of places, some in Romania, some in the Netherlands, some in Arizona.
Thank you very much. I think we have Senator Slotkin now.
Thank you, Chairman. Generals, thank you for being here and for your really significant service to the country. We appreciate you. I'm sure you're not crying any tears that this may be your last hearing in front of this committee, but we're happy to have you. And General Cavoli, I can't think of a general more associated with Americans' response to the invasion of Ukraine than you, given the role as SACEUR that you've been playing for these last number of years. Just to establish a baseline, you said at the Aspen Security Forum that supporting Ukraine is vital for American security. Can you confirm that you still believe that that is correct?
I do believe that, yes, ma'am.
And you also said that Russia was, no matter what, no matter how this war concludes, was still going to be a big problem. Do you believe that after Russia invaded Georgia, then Crimea, then eastern Ukraine, that if some sort of deal was reached with Vladimir Putin, especially one that advantaged him, that he'd be done with invading neighboring countries, that he would be done with adventurism in Europe?
I do not, ma'am. My professional assessment, based on years of study, is that this is part of a broader pattern in Russian history and certainly in current Russian activity. How the U.S. oriented against that is not my call,
of course,
but that is my assessment of their threat.
Based on your experience on the ground and having to negotiate, again, military to military with the Russians and others, do you believe that the Russians are a trustworthy negotiating partner?
I believe they are. I believe they are a very deliberate negotiating partner. I believe they are very strategic in their negotiations, even over small tactical things that I've been involved in over the years. And I believe they're highly proficient at it, and they will always chase their interests.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about how the relationship between Russia and China has evolved over the course of this war? Is it safe to say that since the war in Ukraine, Russia has become the biggest provider to China of military technology and equipment?
They have certainly increased the amount they provide. I'm not a China expert, so I'm not sure who exactly the biggest is. And in closed session, we can talk a little bit about what exactly they've been providing. One of the things in reverse, though, Senator, frequently I get asked, what sort of support is China providing Russia? And I think one of the most pernicious types of support they provide is moral support to Russia, because it justifies the violation of another country's sovereignty, which I think is highly problematic were it to become widespread.
Yeah, I mean, just in open source, we can find that Moscow is helping Beijing develop submarine, aeronautic, and missile technologies in exchange for China's, as you say, moral support for Russia's war, maybe other things beyond moral support. And even though this administration has had very little to say about China's military role and about this partnership as they try and negotiate with Russia, and despite the Pentagon's new national defense strategy, which says that they're focused on China, we really don't see a lot of visibility on this pernicious topic, which is an alliance stronger than ever, or a relationship at least stronger than ever between China and Russia. Is Russia helping China develop military capabilities that could impact the United States?
Again, in closed session, we could talk about it, but they're certainly cooperating not for the benefit of the United States.
Right, but I mean, China, they can have other interests in other countries, but I think we are a primary focus for the Chinese military. I don't think that's a classified statement in any way. Do you believe that the Chinese are watching what we do in Europe, in Ukraine, and with Russia, and learning lessons that they may use when it comes to potentially taking over Taiwan?
They are.
Do you believe, what are the lessons then that you think they're learning from this, watching us in this conflict, as we now quickly move to negotiate with Putin, put a lot of trust in him and the person that invaded a democracy? Do you think it makes them more likely or less likely to go ahead and try and take Taiwan?
Ma'am, I think they're learning lessons at every echelon, one of them being the policy-making and decision-making echelon. I'll leave that to others to comment on. But at the military level, operationally and tactically, they're studying the conflict very, very hard in ways that we know they would apply to their to any potential conflict in Taiwan.
Again, thank you for your service, your long service, both of you, and I yield back to whoever is acting as chairman. Okay, there we go.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, twice the GDP of Russia. but it's also been the biggest free rider in NATO for decades. They've finally reached 2% of GDP on defense by some metrics, but they're still not a very capable force. Germany promised in 2023 to deploy an armored brigade to Lithuania, and that brigade isn't going to be fully operational until 2027. It takes the nation that once fielded hundreds of divisions 4 years to move a single brigade just a few hundred miles away from Germany. General Cavoli, the Europeans are finally starting to spend more on their defense, but how long is it going to take before their spending turns into real capability?
Thanks, Senator. This is a very important question because we have been waiting a long time to get the levels of defense spending we're starting to see. Now there's got to be something to buy. So we have a lot of countries, 23 nations, budgeting over 2% this year, several going over 3%. I believe the number 6 are over 3% this year. Now it's a matter of converting it into hardware and organizations. And our industrial base, both in Russia and on this side of the Atlantic, is struggling to produce the relevant equipment and the quantities needed. So basically, there's more money available than stuff right now, sir. I think
Why?
Well, our defense industrial bases on both sides of the Atlantic consolidated and atrophied under lack of orders. And then there are some bureaucratic problems in governments in terms of acquiring stuff so that it goes slowly. But I think this question of the elasticity of our defense industrial base, again, on both sides of the Atlantic, is one of the great strategic questions of the next 10, 15 years.
Got it. The German defense minister last year said that Germany needed to move towards spending 3% of its GDP or more on defense. Do you think the Germans are serious about spending that much on their military?
Yeah, I think they are, Senator. And the reason I say that is because Friedrich Merz was just elected as the next chancellor in Germany, and very rapidly he, sort of outlined the next coalition that he's going to be leading, and they came to an agreement to do a massive increase in defense spending, far beyond the 100 billion euros they talked about a couple of years ago. And the way they got there was by releasing the so-called debt brake that prevented Germany from assuming deficit spending. So they have exempted defense spending from the debt brake. This is an historic breakthrough for them, and it is the thing that's going to allow them to apply their rather prodigious economic resources to defense. They have a very strong plan to modernize and to expand. It's exactly in accordance with what I need as the Supreme Allied Commander, and I'm very eager to see this coalition.
Feel like they're collaborating with you on that plan?
Absolutely, sir.
Good. How much would it strengthen your hand if all of our NATO allies increase their spending on defense up to 3%?
Sir, I don't think you've ever met a general who wants less defense spending among the force providers. It would help a great deal.
It would strengthen your hand. It would help.
Absolutely, and we're eager to see it come to pass, and we're especially eager to see it turn into real capability, which is going to require some improvements in our industrial capacity.
It's clear that the United States should redeploy more of its units in Europe to the Pacific, but I also want to make sure that we do that in the right way. General, what U.S. capabilities are our European allies least capable of replacing right now?
Yeah, they're least capable of replacing high-end air and missile defense on a large basis. They depend on us for significant intelligence collection, processing, exploitation, and dissemination. They depend on us for deep, long-range fires. They depend on us for aerial command and control for large-scale campaigns. They depend on us for the backbone of certain parts of command and control. Those are really the key things. There are a few things else that I'd like to go into closed session, sir.
What capabilities can our European allies where are they most prepared to take over from us?
Well, right now they do a variety of things without us, right? So today I believe it's 17 or 20 European ships, NATO ships turned over to my command as SACEUR. Normally, military forces are held by the nations, and then they turn it over to me for particular operations. I have 0 U.S. ships working for me as SACIA right now. I have only 40 individual human beings, Marines, who are participating in the operation to monitor the Baltic Sea. We call it Baltic Sentry. Everything is being done by our European allies in those cases. So they have a variety of things they can do for us in any one of those areas. One of the most important things they do provide is intelligence. While we have exquisite capability to collect, they have very deep understanding of their regions, and they have some capabilities that we struggle to match in that regard. And you know, those intel sharing relationships, sir, are based on a broader relationship that we cultivate very carefully.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Senator Peters.
Thank you, and I want to thank both of you for being here today. And certainly I've appreciated your participation in these hearings over the years, and thank you for your service. General Cavoli, I want to begin by expressing my deepest respect for the soldiers that were lost in Lithuania last week. One of those soldiers that was lost was from my state of Michigan. And I just want folks to know that their service and their sacrifice will never be forgotten. General Langley, Exercise Northern Strike in Michigan helps train thousands of service members from over 20 countries at the National All-Domain Warfighting Center. It's also known as NADWIC. It's composed of Camp Grayling Training Center and over 17,000 square miles of special use military airspace at the Alpena Training Center. NADWIC provides realistic joint force training with our global allies and our partners. In fact, Liberia has been a part of this exercise for the past several years. My question for you is, what role do exercises like Northern Strike play in advancing AFRICOM's strategic goals on the continent?
Senator, thanks for that question. You know, our joint exercise program is indicative of the influence that we have, positive influence in building institutional capacity with our African partners. And then the whole portfolio, and then the exercise that you mentioned as well, adds to their institutional capacity. That's why we're the preferred partner. As we go forward and they address their challenges in building security cooperation or the ability to address the multiple layered threats that these countries face, they choose the United States. I know that the Chinese Communist Party and even the Russian Federation are through their throes of efforts of trying to replicate it, but they always come back to the United States to be the preferred partner for building institutional capacity. So for the exercise there and what Liberia does, they chose right.
Well, that's good. And I want to kind of pick up on that is in terms of the competition we have with both Russia and the CCP and their influence operations in Africa. As you know, China employs strategic narratives to justify and enhance their presence in sub-Saharan Africa. Through partnerships with African journalist training programs, the CCP integrates its perspective into local media. It directly engages in more than 60 African political parties. But their most influential impact, I think you would agree, has been the Belt and Road Initiative, which has significantly impacted Africa's economic landscape through substantial investments, particularly infrastructure investments. In 2023, African countries experienced a 47% increase in Chinese construction contracts and a 114% surge in investments compared to the previous year, which totals about $21.7 billion, a substantial amount. So my question for you, sir, is can you expand upon the growing presence that China has in Africa politically, economically, and militarily, and how that is a threat to our very important strategic interest on the continent?
Yes, Senator, thanks for that question. China's trying to set the globe now. They want to be the global hegemon now. Chairman Xi has put out a 2049 plan, but they want to get there earlier. So therein lies the importance that we engage and show assurance actions, but we just can't just harbor the facts. We harbor the facts, but we don't own the narrative. That's being drowned out by the CCP and their campaign plans to be able to influence civil society, influence the militaries. They can't replicate what we do, whether it be their trying to copy what we're doing in our IMET or our international military education training. It doesn't compare. And we match our efforts, whether it's Title 22 funding or Title 10 funding, whether it be security, the State Partnership Program, or the SFABs, Security Force Assistance Brigades. They build institutional capacity like none other. Our African partners know that. So whatever is in the information space, we do need to meet it with a comparable narrative. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And once again, thank you to both of you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you. I will call on myself now. From Truman and Eisenhower through Reagan and Gates, U.S. leaders, no matter how committed NATO, have made some interesting comments I think are worth highlighting here. General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, noted that if in 10 years, this is, by the way, in 1951, if in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe for national defense purposes have not been returned to the United States, then this whole project will have failed. Dean Acheson, the Secretary of State, said the United States must lead, but it must not carry. President Kennedy said, we want to make sure that NATO is not a fair weather organization. The burden of freedom must be shared equally among its members. LBJ stated, LBJ had similar thoughts, and his administration demanded offset agreements from West Germany to cover the costs of U.S. troops there. President Nixon and Henry Kissinger. Nixon noted, the United States will participate in the defense and development of allies and friends, but America cannot and will not conceive all plans, design all programs, execute all decisions, and undertake all the defense of free nations of the world. Caspar Weinberger said, our European allies must recognize that security cannot be achieved by words alone. It must be backed by commitment and capability. Robert Gates, in his farewell speech to NATO, said there will be a dwindling appetite to expand increasingly precious funds on behalf of nations that are apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources to be serious and capable partners in their own defense. Even Secretary Mattis said Americans cannot care more for your children's future security than you do. While some of my colleagues have been wringing their hands over the possibility the United States might step away from its role as a supreme allied commander in Europe, I can tell you who isn't all that worried about it. It's the American people. Quite frankly, they probably thought that ended when Dwight D. Eisenhower was no longer the supreme allied commander. And speaking of General Eisenhower, I read that quote. If in 10 years all American troops in Europe for military purposes have not returned to the United States, then this whole project will have failed. That's 70 years ago, over 70 years ago. Time and time again, the United States is expected to shoulder Europe's defense while rich European countries sit back, issue statements, and undeliver. Some of my colleagues point out that since the war in Ukraine began, Europe has collectively spent as much as on European defense as the United States, as if that's some great triumph. To me, it just shows how upside down this whole arrangement is. How is it even remotely impressive that the nations defending their own continent are only barely keeping pace with the country across the Atlantic? If Europe really believes it's facing an existential threat from Russia, it should be spending not just as much as we have, but magnitudes more than we do. 10 times, 100 times. That's what a commitment would look like. And please stop telling me that comparing spending in Europe is even. That's laughably narrow. When you compare U.S. defense spending in Europe to Europe's, you ignore everything else America does worldwide, much of which directly benefits Europe. Who ensures freedom of navigation in the Red Sea when European trade flows there daily? We do. Who contains China's growing dominance across the Indo-Pacific, stabilizing global markets and maritime routes that Europe depends on? We do. Without U.S. global power projection, the European way of life wouldn't exist as we know it. And still, they won't even take primary responsibility for their own backyard. If Russia really is a continent-wide threat, as European leaders say, then where is the urgency? Where is the mobilization? With few exceptions, Poland and the Baltic states, Europe is not acting like it's facing down a generational threat, not even close. And I'm getting tired of being asked to go home to Missouri and explain to working Americans, the people I represent, why they should send more money, more troops, more of their sons and daughters to defend a continent that refuses to defend itself. Why should we care more about Moscow than people in Paris who are 2 hours away by plane? It doesn't make sense, and it's time to stop pretending that it does. For 80 years, we've told Europe to get serious about their own defense. They have blown us off. They haven't listened. Maybe they never will, as long as we keep doing the job for them. So yes, maybe we should have a conversation about the Supreme Allied Commander role. Maybe having an American general in that seat furthers this ruse. We should have the debate, not simply dismiss it. Let's have an honest conversation about it. American priorities in Europe, what they should be. Let's stop confusing symbolism with strategy. And while we're at it, maybe let's stop waving foreign flags in the House floor when Americans can barely afford groceries. Some of my colleagues seem to think that defending Ukraine matters more than defending our own border. I disagree, and so do the American people. It's time to have a serious realignment. Let Europe grow up and carry its own weight. America's job is not to babysit the world. It's to protect our people and our interests. Full stop. General Cavoli, I had a bunch of questions for you, but I had to say what I had to say. So I guess since I'm the chairman, I'll ask one question right now. Greenland. Can you just talk about the strategic importance and why that matters to the United States of America?
Sure. I'll talk about it from my perspective as...
Yeah, not from a policy perspective, from a military perspective.
But from a military perspective, Senator, I'll limit my comments to my field of expertise, which is the European theater, right? EUCOM AOR and the SACEUR AOR. The key there is it forms the western border of the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, which is that body of water through which Russian submarines from the Northern Fleet in Murmansk come up and then down through that gap. And once they get past that gap, they break out into the Atlantic. It becomes very tough to track them. It's a vast expanse. There are some acoustic things about the underwater geography that make it pretty tough. From those positions that they can achieve, they can hold the U.S. homeland at risk, several important targets with land attack cruise missiles. Greenland is the western boundary of that gap. So my access to it, the airspace and water space bounding Greenland is absolutely critical for the United States.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. First of all, thank you both for your service, and I join many of my colleagues in regretting your retirement. You both have been frank, informative, dedicated, and really models of public service, and I wish you well on behalf of all of us. General Cavoli, we've talked over the years about Vladimir Putin's murderous invasion of Ukraine. There's no question who the aggressor is here, and there's no question in my mind that the aggression, this murderous, bloody assault, is continuing with undiminished force against Ukraine. As you note very powerfully in your testimony, Russia is building its military strength. The Kremlin learns quickly and historically that it restructures forces as necessary. It's already reconstituting itself. It's tapping additional manpower and preparing to continue this assault, and at the same time, slow-walking and playing us in supposed negotiations. I'm not going to ask you to comment on the negotiations. I recognize that your mission is military in nature, but I would ask you how you would characterize Russia's ability to recoup its material and personnel losses in Ukraine. Will it succeed in rebuilding after its losses, and what kind of threat does that represent to American security interests? So
If we divide Russia's rebuilding capability into two big blocks, personnel and equipment, I believe the personnel they'll be able to build as quickly as they want to. They continue to maintain a conscription. You saw that just last week, the Russian government announced its annual conscription drive. It increased by 10,000 over last year, 160,000 this year. With those numbers, they will be able to constitute the force size that they choose fairly quickly. Be a little tougher, take them a little bit more time to organize it into the sort of organizations that they have said they want to build after the war. They want to have an army of about 1.5 million, they've announced. They want to put a lot of it on the border of NATO and northeastern Europe. It'll take them a little bit of time to do that, but we're talking a couple of years. Equipment, that depends on how much more they lose inside Ukraine, sir. They've lost a vast amount of equipment inside Ukraine. They started the war with someplace near 13,000 tanks on active and in storage, and they're starting to approach near the end of that, near the end of the useful tanks in storage. So depending on how much more they lose, that will really determine how quickly they can regenerate. They have expanded their capability to produce some things, artillery shells, cruise missiles, tremendously. And they're producing some things such as one-way attack drones in prodigious numbers that they weren't even producing at all before the war.
And I would characterize that capability as offensive. In other words, they're not defending against a possible invasion from Ukraine. They are preparing for continuing offensive actions against Ukraine and possibly NATO allies if they are successful in Ukraine.
And I would add to that, Senator, that this is not just in the ground domain. They have long-range aviation that practices daily, moving out and doing strikes across North America. They have their strategic ballistic missile fleet, their road mobiles that are constantly out there, and they have their submarine fleet that's constantly out there. So it's not just in those domains. And then there is, of course, the cyber domain, in which, you know, they're very active. We can talk about in closed session, sir.
Just one last question, General, because I've heard from some of the critics of our military aid to Ukraine that there are significant numbers of weapons embezzled, stolen, missing from the aid that we're providing Ukraine. On every one of the visits, I've been to Ukraine 6 times now, I've talked to our military and logistics folks in Poland, and they are tracking virtually every bullet that we have provided to Ukraine, and there's no evidence whatsoever of this kind of misconduct or misappropriation of our aid to Ukraine. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree with that, Senator. There will be a challenge locating all of it later. You know, all of us have been in combat, realize that it's pretty easy to misplace things and to lose track of things. But we've seen no deliberate effort to transfer, sell, or steal weaponry. The Ukrainians are using it to defend their country.
My hope is that Russia will take seriously the efforts to peace and stop stonewalling and slow-walking negotiations. But right now, they seem to be playing us and playing for time. And I want to thank you again for your incredible service, both of you, to our great country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. General Langley, let me ask a few more questions here as we hopefully recess. Africa is a mineral-rich, resource-rich continent. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, and you can leave the microphone on. Which are there success stories for the citizens of African countries when these larger, more prosperous nations or companies from more prosperous areas come in and exploit these minerals? What I'm asking is, that, does it ever redound to the benefit of the citizens there in Africa?
Chairman, there's very few cases. When the Chinese Communist Party is outed on them pulling out raw materials, not benefiting the populations of the host country, they've been trying to come up with ways how they can stay there and process only at the protests of the people of these African countries that host these mineral resources.
Okay. So is there any exception? Can you point to any success story where the people of one country or one or two countries have actually benefited substantially?
Not on China's behalf.
Okay.
Not on China's behalf. Just what happened in Zambia when they had the spillage into the river that services 5 million people. There's just these mining concessions. It just doesn't turn out real well for the African countries.
And do the countries that are receiving entreaties from the Belt and Road Initiative, are they more and more mindful of that now and therefore reluctant?
Yes, and that's where we need to be able to do information operations to illuminate some of the irregularities and some of the malign type activities of the Chinese in African countries.
Information and narratives are power then, aren't they?
Absolutely. And as I said a few minutes ago, and I always will tout this, that we own the facts. We own the facts. We know exactly what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, and to some degree what the Russian Federation is doing in their propaganda operations. But we don't own the narrative. Both of them own the narrative.
We sure don't. One more thing for you, General Langley. The approach that we have had with USAID and the other things like the President's Initiative on AIDS, how does our U.S. approach compare and contrast to the approach of Russia in Africa and also Communist China in Africa?
Oh, Chairman, we've always had the lead. So what you're seeing in those two competitors or challengers, they're following in our wake. They see what works as far as our influence and deepening partnerships through those soft powers, whether it be health diplomacy or whether it be in development type programs. So they're following in our wake, trying to replicate what we do best. And I think the African countries know this, and so this is where, as we start to look at going forward, as State Department starts to reset these programs, looking at what worked and what didn't work, and doubling down on what does work. I think we have enough capital built up in these countries for them to ensure their stabilization and also prosperity. The other two competitors are just trying to replicate what we do best.
I can imagine a situation, though, in which the ruling elite of a country is receiving gratuities on the side that inure to the benefit of the strongman leader and not to the populace of the country. Does that sort of corruption and bribery go on with regard to the Belt and Road?
Absolutely, Chairman. I see this, and I don't mind calling them out, but Captain Tory and Burkina Faso, as they know that both, whether it's their gold reserves, that is all those proceeds are just in exchange to protect the junta regime. There's a number of examples across. Even in Sudan, what's going on with the rapid support forces and Burhan of the Sudan forces, when you get down to it, is all about the revenue that can be drawn out of that. And there are nefarious actors in the CCP or in sometimes Russia are complicit in those activities.
Okay, well, you can't imagine how frustrating it seems to me that this mineral-rich continent has not been able to move to a utilization of the resources to benefit the people there. After all this time, it's a puzzle that we haven't unwound. Let me see if I can move to General Cavoli, and then I hope we can leave. You're aware of various voices coming from inside government here in the United States, as well as in the media, that have spoken with approval about the Russian organized referendums in 2022 in so-called overwhelming Russian-speaking provinces. General Cavoli, tell us what you know and what you understand about the freedom of those organized referendums and the accuracy of them as a measure of public opinion.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I'm familiar with the voices in Washington that are talking about this, but I do remember them very well. They were referendums in Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson provinces. They were in September 2022. They were roundly condemned by nations throughout the world and by international organizations. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe called them illegitimate. The United Nations called them illegal. I think the only country in the world that accepted the result of those referenda, other than Russia, was North Korea. So they have widely been considered not to be legitimate for a variety of reasons about the way they took place and taking place during a conflict by an occupying power.
So if members of Congress want to be informed by what happened in these referenda, if our negotiators in this peace process want to be informed by these referenda, what lesson should we take from the legitimacy of those votes?
Sir, I think that anybody who wants to know about it, it's pretty well established history. It's pretty easy to find. I could certainly help direct your colleagues or anybody you want to sources on it. What conclusions can we draw? We can draw the conclusion that, the Russian Federation was intent on absorbing those provinces and attempted to put a gloss of legitimacy over it by holding a referenda that had, results like 99% in favor.
Rigged results, correct?
That was the widespread conclusion at the time in 2022. Yes, sir.
And also, since you are a student of the Russian language yourself, is the fact that the Russian language is spoken in part of Ukraine, is that demonstrative of their loyalty with regard to their nationality?
Well, we see linguistic minorities in countries all over the world, sir. There certainly is a dominant Russian language population in eastern Ukraine. We see a Russian language population in eastern Estonia. So it's
they consider themselves loyal Estonians, do they not?
Yeah, it really doesn't have much to do with sovereignty at all. I mean, we have large populations in our country that don't speak English.
That's the point I was trying to make. Senator Reid, we will be going into a closed session. Do you have any questions for the open session?
I have a few questions, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Cavoli, in your military opinion, does the U.S. agreement with Denmark to facilitate access and basing needs in Greenland meet current military requirements?
Sir, I can only talk about the part of the military requirements that affect me. So our principal presence on Greenland, the United States personal presence on Greenland is the base at Pitafik in northwestern Greenland. That is not under my operational or administrative control. That's a Space Force base. And I don't know if it's adequate for them or not. From my perspective as both the Supreme Allied Commander and the U.S. European Command Commander, I have all the access and basing I need to prosecute the operations that we've talked about in the high north during this
So
conference.
that, from your perspective, European Greenland, just to get the facts right, is within your area of operations.
Greenland is within my area of operations as the Supreme Allied Commander, and it is within my area of operations as the U.S. European Command Commander.
And you feel at this juncture we have all the capacity we need to confront the threats going forward?
Yeah, again, Senator, my part of that is what I can comment on. That's from the coast of Greenland eastward and northward to counter Russian threats coming out of there. I can't really speak for Northcom's interests or anything like that.
Thank you. If AFRICOM is dissolved and merged into EUCOM, you would have a responsibility for more than 50 countries. Do you have the capacity, the expertise, the infrastructure to
I would have the responsibility for 50 more countries.
Yes, exactly right.
It would be a stretch, Senator. I mean, that's a wide span of control. I think that the organization, if it were aggregated, would possess the expertise and the capacity, because when AFRICOM was created in 2007, it was mainly created by cleaving it out of the EUCOM headquarters and establishing it separate, actually in some cases in the exact same buildings. So my assumption would be that a lot of that capacity would have to come back to EUCOM in order to be able adequately to handle the threats and the problems that General Langley's talked about today. It would have to be studied very, very closely, of course.
Thank you. I have one question for General Langley, and just a comment. We've talked a lot about the German contributions, and it's increasing, thank goodness. But I think we miss some of the history here. For many, many decades, Germany was divided, so that it's not the same country now that it was in the 1960s, et cetera, in terms of its economic capacity. And the second point that strikes me is that for many, many years after World War II, there was a great reluctance upon Germany, and indeed most other countries in the world, to see them create a powerful military force. We had seen that before, after World War I. And so I think that has to be factored into their reluctance to spend on defense. But now I think it's a turnaround, and they're putting a great deal of resources, as they should. Final question. General Langley, have you had specific comments from any of your counterparts about the withdrawal of USAID from Africa? Have they commented to you like, why are you doing this, or?
Ranking Member, thanks for that question. I went to the Munich Security Conference about a month ago, or greater than a month ago, and after I got my direction from the Secretary of Defense, what my priorities were, especially counterterrorism and also to deter China and their military activities on the continent, it kind of refined my mission. Then I had to come up with my narrative to engage these countries, be very transparent and straight talk of that we're going through the pause and we're in a reflection period of assessing what has worked in the past and what's going to work in the future. And what's going in the future will be more targeted to what their needs are, but they also need to be able to build towards a sense of independent operations. I expressed this and talked to Cote d'Ivoire, their MOD, and even in Ghana, the new president-elect, President Mahama. They understood that and also carried on that narrative. They appreciated me being transparent. Carried on that narrative when I went to Morocco as well, when we delivered the helicopters, and they understand it. And so it's more of a burden-sharing type message, and also a regimented message of getting towards the host nation coming to the point of independent operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. This concludes the open portion of today's hearing. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony. For the information of members and staff, questions for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of this hearing. We will commence the closed portion of this hearing in Senate security at the hour of 12:10, 10 minutes past noon, and until then we are recessed.